Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever and whenever you may be listening to this broadcast. I'm Mark Holliday. Let's get into this encouraging word for today. Before we get started, I want you to do something. I want you to like, subscribe. I want you to share this video. What I want to talk to you today about is what's going on in society. I want to talk to you about staying mentally strong, staying mentally tough. You know, there's a saying, only the strong survives. And I used to doubt that saying, but there is some truth to that about staying mentally strong. Whatever you endeavoring to do, whatever you go into, whether it's your manhood, your womanhood, whether it's your ministry, whether we're talking about money, whether we're talking about something on the job and society, you know, only the strong survives. But not just that. I want to always know, what does God has to say about being strong? What does God has to say about being mentally strong? The reason why we find a lot of people that this isn't a knock, because I know somebody's going to say, well, you haven't walked in this person's shoes. You shouldn't say what I'm about to say. A lot of times why people are going through depression, they're going through suicidal ideations, they're going through a lot of low self-esteem. It all starts with how you think. Even the biggest war that you would ever fight, it's not with guns and knives and sticks and stones. The biggest war that you will go through is going on in your mind. And that's what I want to talk to you about, because God gave us the recipe and what we should do when we're going through spiritual battles. If you know how to fight a battle, if you know how to, if you have a game plan together, you will know exactly how to fight your battles. You will understand when the enemy is attacking you. You will understand when God is speaking something to your spirit, man. Yes, God can speak to your spirit, man. God will drop an idea right down on the inside in your inner man, and you'll be able to have vision, insight, and understanding. Again, the reason why some people fail in life or miss the blessings or the doors that they should walk through is because they miss that inner voice. And it all goes back to spiritual warfare. That's what I want to talk to you about in these next broadcasts. So that being said, let's delve into the scripture today. I want to talk to you about today is, who am I fighting? That's right. Who am I fighting? Again, I preface this message with this. If you can pinpoint who you're fighting, then you can fight strongly, boldly, and correctly. You ever heard the term of friendly fire? Well, that means that during times of war, the same team or the same military combat team accidentally opened fire on some of their own comrades or colleagues. How many times have we seen this happen in our marriage, on our job, in our relationships? Friendly fire. We didn't mean to wound you, or you didn't mean to wound this person, but you opened up fire on them. So that being said, you got to understand what's talking to you and who's talking to you. I want you to turn to the book of Ephesians. We're going to start with the sixth chapter, and we're going to start in the 10th verse here. As that we do the background reading of this, first Paul began to talk about the family. He began to address the children and the husbands and the wives and how we should love one another, stick with one another, listen to one another, work with one another. And in order to do that, you have to do what's getting ready to be talked about in the 10th verse. Now, Paul is getting ready to describe the military soldier or a Roman soldier. Now, you know, your boy Paul spent time in a correctional center. And while he was in the correctional center during that time, Paul got a revelation of one of the Roman guards. He saw how he was dressed, and he began to give the revelation. This is how the believer must dress when they're in spiritual battle. Now watch this now. In verse 10, Paul said, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Now God didn't say get strong. He didn't say be strong. He said, he said, be strong, but he said, finally, my brother, be strong in the power of his might. Now, initially he didn't say get strong. He said, be strong. In other words, it's a stance you got to take on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week. You got to be willing to take on this strength from God. Now, and watch what he says now. He says, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. How many of you all have been in a predicament, or you've had some teachings where they taught you about this mental energy, or they taught you to pull on the strength of the universe, or they taught you to pull from within, and you're going in this human effort or this human strength. But it comes a time when you have tapped all the strength that you have within yourself, and now you need a strength outside of yourself. Again, I go back to this military analogy. Whenever you find soldiers in a firefight and they're on the ground, and when they're surrounded by the enemies, you find one guy on comms or communication, he begins to call in additional resources. More than likely, they call in an airstrike. And when they give their coordinates, they tell their forces or their backup exactly where they are and where the enemy is. And what do? They drop in additional bombs that annihilate the enemy around them. See, they got to the point where they exhausted all of their firefight, and they began to call in additional resources. Some of you are to the point right now where you have to call in additional resources, so you're being strong in God and in the power of his might. You used up all of your military force, all of your military power, you used up all of your strength, but comes a time that you need to pull on something that's outside of yourself, and that person is God. Now watch this. Look what it says in verse 11. Now he says, put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Now I don't want to get ahead of myself, and sometimes you got people today won't mention this term devil or the adversary because it sounds too spiritual, it sounds antiquated, it sounds too churchy, because we live in an educated society now. We live in a more advanced society now, and there is no such thing as devil. And you know, and God is this good God that want to do all of these things for you. But watch this. He said that you got to put on the armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles or the tactics of the devil. Many of you all think your enemy is your spouse. You think it's your supervisor. You think it's your neighbor. You think it's the gays. It's the straight people. You think it's the whites or the blacks. You think it's the Republican or the Democrats. You think it's another country, but according to God, your adversary is the devil. Now, Paul said in another passage of scripture, or Peter, he said, your adversary, the devil, is as a roaring lion. Not he is a roaring lion. He is as a roaring lion, walking about seeking whom he may devour. Now we're talking about who am I fighting against, because if you know who you're fighting against, then you know who to attack or know who to leave alone and pray for. Now, Paul says in this scripture that you got to be willing to put this on. Now, I'm prefacing all this or setting something up because we're going to talk about the armor of God. But before you can even deal or put on the armor of God, you got to know who you're fighting against. You got to know who you're going after. You got to know who's the friendlies and who's the enemies. You got to know who's the imposters, but you got to also know who's the real enemy and who's the friend. Now in verse 12, now watch this. Paul said, for we're wrestling not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, first of all, let's break this down. He said, you're not fighting against, again, your wife. You're not fighting against a neighbor. You're not fighting against your employer. You're not fighting against a Democratic or Republican, a conservative or a liberal. You're not fighting against a black or white. You're not fighting against a straight guy. You're not fighting against a gay guy. And this is the tactic of the enemy. He got us pointing the finger at one another when we should be pointing it at someone else. Now, I don't negate that this person attacked me that looks like the aforementioned, but it's something that's motivating that individual to do what they're doing. How can I say that? If you go back and read in Genesis, maybe around the 6th chapter, God says something that was vitally important before he destroyed the first world. He said that violence is in the world, but it was through the people. In other words, the enemy is looking for someone to use. And so the enemy is not the person, it's the enemy using the person. The person may be a conservative that you dislike. They may be a liberal liberal, a gay or straight, a Democrat or Republican, black or white. They may be that individual, but it's the enemy that's using that person. And you got to know without a shadow of a doubt who your fight is against, because if you don't, you're going to end up wounding somebody. Now, listen, I'm going to keep this short and sweet here because I'm going to pick back up in the next broadcast. But the recap is, first two things God told us to do. He told us to be strong in him and in the power of his might. Positive thinking won't get you there. Positive confessions alone won't get you there. It has to be something outside of yourself. And then finally, Paul said, I want you to put on the armor of God. And in other words, it's a dress wear that you put on. When a soldier goes out to fight, if you look at a 21st century soldier, you're going to see they're going to have their helmet on. They're going to have their comms unit on. They're going to have their guns in their hands. The AK-47 is going to be a shotgun. It's going to be some type of semi-automatic. They're going to have their fatigues on. They're going to have bulletproof vests. My point is this: they have put on the armor of a soldier. So God says, I want you to put on my full armor. And then he said, you're putting it on so you'll be able to stand against the devil. You can't stand against the enemy naked. Watch this now. Don't get too graphic in your mind, but can you imagine a man or a woman, because there's women in the military, maybe not on the battlefield, but can you imagine a soldier standing in the middle of the battlefield in his boxer shorts? You will know he'll be picked off the first 7 seconds. When they stormed the beaches of Normandy, I believe it was, they said the average lifespan of a soldier was about 8 seconds. And you know why? Because maybe it was their tactics, maybe it was their approach. But on the next broadcast, I'm going to show you how to use the armor of God. You got everything on, as we already said, but it's a way and way you have to use it. You have to understand it. So when you put the armor on and you know how to use it, you will know how to fight your enemy and know who your enemy is and be able to readily recognize them. Listen, I'm going to stop right there, Mark Holliday. That's your encouraging word for today.